Thabane Bogota knew the city's criminals better than most police officers, but even he couldn't have predicted that a dismissed trainee would exploit their weaknesses to commit a series of daring crimes that left the entire community on edge. Thabane Bogota had built a reputation as one of the city's sharpest crime experts, a man whose insight into criminal behavior often left police officers astonished. When a violent robbery occurred in a quiet neighborhood, he was immediately called to the scene. The local police arrived late, their movements slow and uncoordinated, revealing glaring gaps in their training. Officers fumbled with evidence, fingerprints were smudged, and witnesses were left standing in confusion. Unsure of what to do next, Thabane watched silently, taking mental notes of every mistake. He understood that these small lapses could allow criminals to escape without leaving a trace, and he knew he had to step in before the case was lost entirely. As he walked through the crime scene, Thabane's eyes caught subtle details that the officers had overlooked. Scratches on the window frame suggested a struggle, while a faint trail of mud led toward a side alley. A security camera cover had been deliberately removed, signaling that the robber knew the building's layout and the police response times. Each of these clues painted a picture of someone meticulous, careful, and aware of the weaknesses in law enforcement. While the officers seemed frustrated and confused, Thabane's mind worked quickly, connecting the dots that others failed to see. He realized that the lack of training among the police was more than just an inconvenience, it was a dangerous vulnerability. Simple errors, like failing to secure the perimeter or mishandling potential evidence, gave criminals an edge. Thabane knew that in a city where crime was increasing, these mistakes could mean the difference between capturing a suspect and letting them vanish into the shadows. He began to reconstruct the robbery in his mind, imagining the path the perpetrator had taken, the tools used, and the timing of each action. The more he analyzed, the clearer it became that this was no random act of violence. Someone had planned this with precision, relying on the police's predictable mistakes to carry out the crime. Thabane documented each observation carefully, knowing that this evidence could be the key to catching the culprit. He also understood that this case would be a test of the city's justice system, highlighting the consequences of poor training and insufficient preparation. As he stepped out of the crime scene, the weight of responsibility settled on him. If the police continued to stumble, the criminal would remain free, emboldened to strike again. Thabane's mind raced with strategies, anticipating the moves of both the perpetrator and the officers, determined to bring clarity and justice to a system struggling to keep up with the growing threat of crime. The city had barely recovered from the first violent robbery when a new wave of break-ins began to unsettle neighborhoods. Homes were targeted late at night, and each time, the police seemed unable to connect the incidents. Thabane Bogota watched as officers repeated the same mistakes he had observed before. Crime scenes were left unsecured, evidence contaminated, and eyewitness accounts barely recorded. The lack of proper training was becoming more than a flaw, it was a pattern that criminals could exploit. Thabane knew that to solve these cases, he could not rely solely on the police. As he reviewed the details, Thabane noticed a subtle but telling pattern. The burglaries were not random. Certain streets were consistently chosen, homes with weak security systems targeted, and the timing of the break-ins suggested careful planning. Small signs, almost invisible to the untrained eye, indicated that the perpetrator had insider knowledge of the city's neighborhoods and even police routines. Thabane realized that this was someone who understood how the system worked and, more importantly, how to evade it. Each night the criminal struck, leaving the community anxious and fearful, while law enforcement scrambled without a clear direction. Determined to act, Thabane began reconstructing each break-in. He examined the entry points, the pattern of stolen items, and the escape routes. He noticed a recurring symbol, a subtle mark left near the scene of each crime, almost invisible but unmistakable to a trained observer. This clue suggested that the burglar wanted to send a message, demonstrating control and knowledge that the police could not match. Thabane's analysis revealed a person methodical and confident, moving with precision and exploiting weaknesses he knew existed in the city's law enforcement. As he connected the dots, a disturbing realization emerged. The police officer's lack of training was giving the criminal an advantage that could escalate into more serious crimes. Each failed attempt to catch the burglar not only emboldened the perpetrator but also eroded public trust. Residents began to install private alarms, guards, and surveillance, yet the criminal seemed always one step ahead. Thabang recognized that this case required more than observation. It demanded a strategy that could outsmart someone familiar with law enforcement tactics. Late nights were spent poring over records, analyzing patterns, and predicting the next possible target. Each discovery deepened Thabang's understanding of the criminal's intelligence and the dangers posed by undertrained police officers. He knew that if nothing changed, the city would continue to suffer, and the burglar would continue to operate unchecked. Thabang prepared to take the investigation further, devising a plan that could catch the criminal before the situation escalated beyond control. Thabane Bogopa's investigation took an unexpected turn as he traced the string of break-ins to a person no one had suspected. Through careful analysis of patterns, timings, and the subtle marks left at each crime scene, he discovered that the perpetrator was a former police trainee dismissed years earlier for poor performance. This revelation sent a shock through him. The criminal's knowledge of police procedures explained why officers had struggled so much. He knew their routines, their weaknesses, and the predictable mistakes they would make. What had once seemed like random chaos now revealed itself as a calculated advantage taken from the system itself. The former trainee had used his inside knowledge to manipulate the city's law enforcement. Simple errors by the current police, such as leaving crime scenes unsecured, mishandling fingerprints, and failing to interview witnesses properly, had been exploited with precision. Thabang studied old training reports and discovered that the individual had always been meticulous, observant, and aware of procedural details. Now, with grudges and a sense of revenge, he was applying that knowledge to commit crimes without fear of immediate capture. Each break-in seemed almost like a demonstration of skill, a way to prove that he could outsmart the very system that had once rejected him. As Thabang pieced together the puzzle, he uncovered a deeper connection between the burglaries and several older unsolved cases. Stolen items, missing evidence, and untraceable financial movements all pointed toward a carefully orchestrated plan stretching months, maybe years. The former trainee's intelligence and familiarity with police protocols created an almost invisible trail. It became clear that his intent was not only to steal but also to exploit the law enforcement system itself, turning its weaknesses into his advantage. Thabang felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. The criminal was no longer just a threat to property. He was a symbol of a failing system. Each day that passed without intervention allowed him to grow bolder, more daring, and more difficult to catch. Yet Thabang also realized that with every pattern identified, the criminal was leaving a trace. The key was to understand his logic, predict his moves, and anticipate how he would manipulate the police next. The city remained unaware of the danger lurking so close to its institutions. Ordinary citizens were unaware of the calculated threats around them, relying on a police force ill-equipped to protect them fully. Thabang knew that the solution would not come from standard methods alone. This investigation required ingenuity, patience, and an understanding of human behavior that went beyond manuals and procedures. The challenge was immense, and the stakes were higher than ever. But Thabang was determined to expose the criminal and the cracks in the system before more chaos could unfold. Thabane Bogota knew that relying on the police alone would no longer bring results. The former trainee had shown time and again that he could exploit their weaknesses, moving through the city with confidence while officers struggled to keep up. Thabang realized that catching him required a new approach, one that combined careful observation, analytical thinking, and strategic planning. He began assembling a small team of trusted experts, each skilled in different areas: surveillance, digital analysis, and forensic research. Together, they worked quietly, piecing together every fragment of evidence left behind by the criminal. Each break-in revealed more about the perpetrator's methods. He chose locations strategically, avoided predictable patterns, and left just enough evidence to taunt investigators without being caught. Thabang's team analyzed financial records, monitoring unusual transactions that linked to stolen items. They reviewed hidden CCTV footage from surrounding streets, tracking a shadowy figure who moved confidently through alleys and back roads. The criminal's intelligence and foresight became clearer with each discovery, and Thabang understood that one wrong move could allow him to vanish entirely. The sense of urgency grew heavier with every passing day. One night, after weeks of careful observation, Thabang uncovered a hidden warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was filled with stolen property from multiple break-ins, neatly organized and cataloged as if the criminal was maintaining an inventory. The discovery confirmed what Thabang had feared. the former trainee was not just committing crimes for profit. He had been building a network, planning something far larger than anyone had realized. The realization was chilling. This was no ordinary burglar. He was a calculated mastermind, exploiting the weaknesses of law enforcement for personal gain. Thabang began mapping out the criminal's next possible moves. Using the patterns he had identified, he predicted which areas were likely to be targeted and when. The tension was palpable. One miscalculation could undo weeks of careful planning. Thabang's team worked through the night, monitoring the suspect's movements, preparing for the moment when they could catch him in the act. The city remained unaware of the danger that loomed, but Thabang's meticulous preparation created a small glimmer of hope. Every clue gathered, every detail noted, brought them closer to the climax. Thabang knew that patience and precision were their only allies. The criminal was smart, but the system's weakness alone would no longer protect him. The trap was being set, and the next phase of the investigation would decide whether justice would prevail or whether the former trainee would continue to exploit the city's vulnerabilities unchecked. The tension was unbearable, but Thabang's resolve never wavered. He had come too far to let the criminal slip away. The final phase of the investigation tested Thabane Bogopa's patience, skill, and nerve like never before. Every lead, every pattern, every subtle clue gathered over weeks was now converging toward a single decisive moment. The former police trainee had grown bold, and Thabang knew that the next crime would be audacious. Using everything his team had learned, the timing, the location patterns, even the smallest behavioral hints, he predicted the exact place and hour of the next heist. It was a risky plan, but Thabang understood that waiting for the police to act on their own would only allow the criminal to disappear once again. As night fell, the team positioned themselves strategically, blending into the shadows and monitoring every street and alley. Thabang's heart pounded as he watched the suspect arrive, moving with the same quiet confidence that had defined his previous crimes. For a moment, it seemed almost too easy. The criminal appeared unaware that anyone was watching, as if he had assumed the city's flaws would always protect him. But Thabang and his team had anticipated every possible maneuver. They had prepared for distractions, escape routes, and sudden moves. Every detail was covered. The moment of truth arrived when the former trainee attempted to enter the target location. Almost instantly, Thabang's team closed in from multiple angles, cutting off all escape paths. The criminal realized too late that he had been outsmarted. The arrest was swift and precise, leaving no chance for resistance or evasion. For the first time in months, the city's streets were quiet, free from the tension and fear that had gripped the community. Thabang breathed a quiet sigh of relief, knowing that justice had been served, but also aware of the lessons the city had been forced to learn. The arrest revealed more than just a single criminal. As cunning, it exposed systemic weaknesses within the police force. Poor training, outdated procedures, and negligence had allowed a dangerous individual to operate freely for months. Thabang's intervention had highlighted the importance of knowledge, preparation, and expertise in confronting crime. The city now faced the challenge of rebuilding trust in law enforcement, implementing reforms, and ensuring that officers were properly trained to prevent such situations from recurring. In the aftermath, stolen items were returned, investigations were revisited, and the community slowly regained a sense of safety. Thabang's work became a case study in how criminal expertise combined with meticulous planning could overcome systemic flaws. The former trainee faced the consequences of his actions, but the impact of his crimes served as a stark warning. When protectors are unprepared, criminals can exploit even the smallest weaknesses. Thabane Bogota had brought the case to a close, but the lessons it taught the city would linger for years, a reminder that vigilance, skill, and training were essential to justice.